Welcome. You're watching The Quest with me, Addiel Sabir, helping you understand how Pakistan connects to the region and beyond. Now, of course, Afghanistan has been dominating the world, the news wheels, following 3 weeks of uncertainty. When the US troops had left Afghanistan, the Taliban have finally announced their interim government. The world was waiting with bated breath as to how this government would be formed, who would be part of the cabinet. Of course, it has raised eyebrows already in Washington, which says it's suspicious about some of the members' affiliations and past dealings and track records, especially of the old Taliban era back following 2001. Right, now we're going to bring in a panel with us today who will be able to shed light on some of the announcements made, some of the key figures who were involved in that announcement yesterday. Firstly, let me introduce Dr. Agab Malik. He joins us. He is a Fulbright Scholar awardee from the Elliott School for International Affairs from George Washington University, and he's also an expert on Afghanistan and its geostrategical affairs, and is also an expert on the rise of China. Thank you, Dr. Agab, for joining us. Joining us also is Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodi. He's a defence analyst. Thank you, General, for joining us. And we're also joined by Moyed Jafri. He is a political analyst. Thank you all, gentlemen. Lots to get through. Of course, I just want to just add here that there is news which has broken today that the Panjshir Valley, for those of you who do not know, was one of the last areas that the Taliban had effectively faced resistance to, and before they completely swept the whole of Afghanistan. And there was a firefight which sort of had broken out between the Taliban forces and the resistance fighters. They have set up a national resistance front led by Ahmed Massoud, a young chap who is the son of what was described as the Lion of Panjshir. His father was a resistance fighter against the Soviet Union. Now, following what was said to be a ceasefire between these two warring factions, it later transpired that the Afghan Taliban had said that now that the warring was over, peace had been established, and that they would be now accommodating them into this new interim government. Now, they have come out with a statement which said that they will set up a parallel government, and they have reached out to various international organisations. In the meanwhile, there's been shuttle diplomacy taking place here in Pakistan, especially Foreign Ministry has been very busy of late. They've held a virtual meeting. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, the Foreign Minister, has held a virtual meeting with the neighbouring countries of Afghanistan about the concerns lying ahead. Just want to quickly bring in Moyed Jafri, if I may, to begin with. Moyed, you've seen some of the appointments. What has been the general reaction overall? We know the United States has some reservations about the previous affiliations, some of the track records. Of course, there is one particular member, and we'll talk about him a little later, who's the FBI's most wanted man. So, generally speaking, what's the feeling coming out of Washington and the rest of the world at the moment?
It's rather skeptical, to put it mildly. But basically, that is because they're evaluating the entire paradigm, this entire scenario, based on what they can see on the curriculum vitae or the resume, as you will, of these individuals that have been given key positions. Also, it's important to understand, Adil, here, that this is an interim government setup, so to call. Once the discussion today progresses, we'll talk about what that, I'll try to explain what that basically means. But when it comes to the international media, what I've been monitoring today, we talk about the BBC, CNN, other countries that have weighed in on this, especially from the West. They've been very skeptical, like the United States said, that it has serious concerns. But Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the United States and Washington will not judge the Taliban government based on the names that will be running this show, but based on the behavior of these names that will be running Afghanistan, how inclusive they can be. They're not really happy about the fact that, like the BBC pointed out, that hardliners, as their lead went, hardliners get key positions in Afghanistan's Taliban government. Now, the problem here is that we continue to watch all of this with a lens of the past, then obviously this was a group that was seen internationally, especially by the West, as an extremist group. And they were seen as people who defy human rights based on the definition of human rights by the West, whereas the Taliban say that they are only carrying out what the Sharia law that they've implemented tells them to. To wrap it all up, I personally believe that the West is being, so far, especially Washington, is sounding a little bit fair in its judgment. It has raised its concerns regarding the people like you pointed out, and we will get to that once you ask those questions. I don't want to jump the gun regarding that. But if you see the overall outlook of this 33-member Afghanistan Taliban government, there are certain individuals which are definitely on the US's, have been on the US's list for a long while. But then there are those who have been at the helm of affairs when it comes to negotiations with the US. So it's kind of a mixed bag for the West to deal with. But obviously, once they take major decisions regarding their policies, some of them came out today. The first policy statement that came out after the formation of the government, they said that the government is going to allow for education, and the government is going to follow international laws as long as they do not directly conflict with the Sharia law that the Taliban basically seek to impose in Afghanistan or follow in Afghanistan. So basically, they are the Taliban too are being accommodative. They're being very careful what to say and what not to say, and how to come across as a governing body in Afghanistan. And the West too is kind of, to this point, giving them a slight, you could say, benefit of the doubt unless something terribly goes wrong. So it's kind of like Pakistan's Pakistan's information minister said, that it's more of a wait and see game for now. But yes, both sides are skeptical of each other and how they will react in the future.
All right, we will get onto those particular appointments, and we'll get Dr. Aghab's input very shortly. If I can just quickly switch over to General Lodi. General Lodi, just want to highlight some of the excerpts of that press conference yesterday, and how much of it do you think is going to go down well in the West? Let me just point out a couple of things. I mean, they've said quite categorically that nobody's going to interfere in Afghanistan ever again. They've now actually called themselves the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. That's how they want to be addressed as. They said that they will uphold Islamic rules as per their interpretation of Sharia law. They said that, of course, they would be looking after the rights of minorities, the underprivileged, women. They said that they would encourage education, but also they would encourage religious education. And they said that, they want transparency. They want to be able to appease, if you may, the Afghan people, of course, who've been complaining for many, many years of overt corruption. And they want to instill national values. They want to instill national values, but at the same time, they talk about a very moderate and moderated media, for that matter, saying that it should only serve national interests, and that it had to be selective as to its control of Islamic content. So it seems that they have somewhat reached out. They are extending some sort of olive branch, but some of their statements may still be cause for alarm in the West, perhaps.
Thank you. I think they've done very well so far. If you just look at their cabinet, they have appointed an army chief who is a Tajik. They've appointed a deputy prime minister who is an Uzbek. And there's another minister also, Tajik. I'm not remembering, probably something to do with finance. So all said and done. And they keep reiterating all the issues and girl education and minorities and their space not being used by terrorists and all that. And just I wanted to say something on these two objections which are being made. One, that there are no women ministers and all inclusiveness and all that. First, about talking about the women ministers. There are more than 100 countries in this world where we do not have any women as ministers. Did the USN objected to that? Did we hear anything from UK or from the West? We have a friend from America, he can put us wise. Then making a government all-inclusive. How many Red Indians are there in the American cabinet? And how many Aborigines are there in the Australian cabinet? You can say our society, they have got different norms. So these are all, I think, wrong, I would say, demands. The other demands are right. The best is that they should not use their, they should not allow using their, territory with the terrorists and all that. So I think so far, and the other thing we must remember is they did not get this freedom in charity. They got it after a lot of struggle. So trying to dictate them that do this and do that, I don't understand. I mean, what is the world up to? I am sure, I know that those.
No, very much so. We'll just leave it there and quickly move now to Dr. Aqab to give us a little bit of insight as to the leadership. Dr. Aqab, let's go through the 1, 2, 3. The three which we know about, who are the familiar, the old guard, as they would say. Of course, the Prime Minister himself and his deputy, Mullah Baradar. So we have Siraj Haqqani as well, who is the Interior Minister. So if you could just walk us through perhaps a little bit of a background as to the Prime Minister. I mean, we know that he was on the UN sanctions list. We also know that he was pretty close to Mullah Omar, but we also know that he is what has been said to be highly regarded within the leadership, but he's not the top man. We have Haibatullah Akhundzada, who is the religious de facto head of the Taliban. So perhaps a little bit of insight as to the top three within the structure.
Okay, so we'll start from the Prime Minister. He was a Deputy Prime Minister in the previous administration that the Taliban had in the late 90s. So he's got some background experience as far as governing is concerned, within a limited extent. So I think the Taliban wanted to play it safe. As far as the composition of the cabinet is concerned, we can talk about that in a minute or so. But yes, Baradar is another that has been directly involved with what was happening with the political front as far as Afghanistan was concerned. So it seems that being a Deputy Prime Minister would be the most forthcoming position for him. And I think his background as far as the way he was in Pakistan, his interaction with the global community to an extent, puts him in a place where he can command a certain degree of authority. And then we have the Defense Minister and we have the Interior Minister. Now, the Interior Minister is the one that everybody's worried about in the West, primarily because Sirajuddin Haqqani, the son of the famous Haqqani network organizer and founder, is on the wanted list, most wanted list. And I think they've been trying to kill him for many years. This is one of those sticking points and a thorn to the side of the Americans, I think, and the Brits and the Western world, primarily because as an arch enemy of the United States, he's exceptionally gifted, I'm saying, in a rational manner, looking at the way he conducted himself, in the way he conducted his affairs as far as combating and what he did with the resistance against the occupation. Now, I'm saying this as far as they're concerned. I'm not trying to take side. I've got to be very rational in this and balance it out as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And he is a very capable person in that respect. And putting him there, because of his linkages and his interaction that he's had throughout the process of the Afghan occupation for the last 20 years, he's fundamentally going to be able to secure a strong position. The interior position is where he is pretty well known, knowing exactly what's going on in the country, who's in opposition, who's not in opposition, who is the one that you need to talk to, which power centers are where. He's been involved directly in that. I think some of the other leaders have, but because of the position that he had previously, his interaction and networking throughout the country, that he's very well located in the Interior Ministry than any other, I think. And as a result, he's held that position now. I think it's important to recognize that the Taliban wants to place those people that it trusts in itself to start off the process. What will happen in later stages is something else altogether. When it comes to the announcement of the actual government later on after the interim period, when the negotiations with minorities, for example, take place, and a certain acceptance on who's going to do what, that is another story altogether. Whether he will continue or not is another case in point. But to set them off in a point of stability, this is what the Taliban wanted. They wanted people who are there already, who've been known, who they trust, who've got a good acute knowledge in how to deal with things on the ground and to represent the country. As far as that's concerned, this is the reason why they've selected people. Let me come down to one point that the West is making, which is understood, that there are no females on the cabinet. The fact of the matter is, I think General Lodi pointed out that around 100 countries have no females on their cabinet ministerial positions. But I think it's because this is the focal point that they wanted some evidence that the Taliban had changed. But we also have to recognize that Taliban have been fighting for 20 years as a guerrilla force. And in that respect, women had very rarely got into positions of any significant authority within that group. And they were not able to become intrinsically involved in power positions and to be able to negotiate with other people. And as a result of that, because they've not held any significant positions, and maybe because of the orientation of the Taliban, that it made sense to the Taliban to not have any at the moment. However, I still think that it's important to recognize that they will be finding out maybe to put females in certain sectors, maybe as deputy ministers, but you've got to recognize the origins of the Taliban. It is an extreme movement in its interpretation of Islam as well. And it wants to abide by that and understand where they're coming from. They're not exactly internationally educated. They're educated within the environment that they were brought up in the environment of the conflict, environment of fighting, environment of appreciating what the obstacles they had, and they relied on each other. So at this moment in time, plus the obstacles against females is understood as well. And I think we need to, I'm not saying give a benefit of the doubt at this moment in time. I think pressure needs to be made as well on the Taliban to have an inclusive government. And this is the first stage of whether they change things around. But I think the Taliban is also showing to the world that, look, we fought for 20 years, and it's our choice now.
Absolutely.
And the fact of the matter is, they won. And they're not going to be dictated to, whether we like it or not, they're not going to be dictated to by anybody in the world, because now they won the war, and they can do what they want as far as anybody else is concerned. And the fact of the matter is, I think under the table deals or in the background deals are being made with other countries to see how things develop in a positive light, who are not so critical of what's going to be in the cabinet anyway. So I think the Taliban feel more confident in that respect, to feel off pressure from the West. But time will tell. I think the Taliban still have to negotiate with the rest of the world. They need to be part of the rest of the world, and they need to be able to understand how the world really works. They've been fighting and focusing on the war, and now, suddenly, now they're in power. And I think that transition from understanding conflict and violence and military occupation and military attacks and raids and the war, as they're concerned, will take some time. The mind doesn't change automatically. Their perceptions will take time to adjust to new realities. It's not going to be overnight. I think they were even surprised that the Afghan government didn't hold up. Maybe they would have sorted something out, negotiated, but nothing like that happened. So they've just been thrown into the thick of it. I think that's important to recognize, but we need to keep an eye on them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it took the rest of the world pretty much by surprise as well. But I mean, I think the key thing which many people don't seem to understand is as Dr. Akkad was saying, is they're making this transition from a fighting mode to a governing mode, and that will take some time. And of course, they are desperate for recognition. Without recognition, they won't see any aid coming in. Of course, they don't have access to the financial resources which were in control of the previous Afghan government. And of course, that is now being seized and frozen by the United States. Right, meanwhile, there have been some reports which have been published regarding the resistance force, which was being the Panjshir Valley, in fact, this resistance force, the National Resistance Front, led by young chap, 34 years old, Ahmed Massoud, the son of the legendary fighter, the Lion of Panjshir, who stood against the Soviet forces. They have announced to make a parallel government at a time, just in the backdrop of the new, or what they call the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, its cabinet. Now, this is quite surprising in many ways, because just some days ago there was heavy fighting which took place around the Panjshir Valley. The resistance forces had dug themselves in and they had pledged that they would not surrender. But then there was an agreement which was reached between the Afghan Taliban and the National Resistance Front. On the other side of this break we're going to take now, we'll be discussing how this came about, what this means for this new Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan's cabinet. Will they accept what has happened in the Panjshir Valley? All of that and a little bit more after this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching The Quest. Now, fast on the heels of the announcement made by the interim government in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which was announced yesterday by the Afghan Taliban, there has been another announcement made by an anti-Taliban movement, namely the National Resistance Front. Now, this is being headed by a young chap, 34 years of age, Ahmed Massoud. He hails from the Panjshir Valley. Now, the Panjshir Valley was the last area to be cleared or effectively taken over by the Afghan Taliban, and there was some sort of a ceasefire which was implemented, and an agreement was made that they'd be included as well. But fast on the heels of that came an announcement by this National Resistance Front saying that this was an illegitimate government. It threatened peace in the neighbourhood. It threatened peace to the world. Quite a stark difference to what the reports were a few days ago, saying that it was completely illegitimate, and it has reached out to a number of international bodies. Let me bring in Moyed Jafri into the conversation. Moyed, such reports, we're hearing this very, very open statement being given in the media today, but nothing as far as we know from the Afghan Taliban as such. What do you make of this sudden laying down of arms almost, and then an announcement to raise a parallel government, if you may?
This is a very important development, especially considering the fact that the world has its eyes on how the Taliban government will behave in the coming times, in the coming future. Especially the fact that we have to understand, like I pointed out earlier, that they've named this government as an interim government. We do not know as yet what is the duration of this interim government and for how long will this interim setup stay in place, number one. Number two, what particular form of government will replace this interim government, and what would be the mechanism that would be chosen to form that permanent government in Afghanistan? So these are two very important questions, first of all, that everybody needs to understand, because we are not yet very sure the Taliban would go down the alley of a democratic election for the permanent government that might take over Afghanistan, number one. Number two, regarding the Panjshir resistance or the National Resistance Front's declaration of a parallel government, this is not to be taken lightly, because especially with they're basically banking on the Taliban government to falter. And they are, in a way, giving the international community an alternative to back in case they do not see the Taliban government fulfilling the promises, fulfilling the pledges to the international community that they've made during the Doha Pact and in the negotiations to follow, especially after they take over of the Kabul. With this hanging on top of the head of the Taliban will need to be very careful, because they are, like we've been talking about, spoilers in the Afghan peace process as well, and after the takeover of Kabul. The spoilers that have been spurring on the Panjshir resistance, they've been pledging support. India has been going out of its way to do so. Amrullah Saleh was there, and he was basically, providing some sort of an impetus to this movement. So this, and especially the fact that they've been making these repeated calls to international community, to international bodies to support them in taking over or you could say dethroning the Taliban in Afghanistan, this would be you could say, troublesome for the Taliban in coming future, because they present the world with an alternate. It's something, not exactly, but something like the West is very fond of doing, propping up opposition and identifying and recognizing them as the true government. For example, you can take the example of Venezuela, where Juan Guaido was recognized by the West as the rightful president of Venezuela, whereas there is an actual government of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. So this declaration it might not appear as very strong and very powerful right now, especially after the fact that they were defeated in the recent offenses and they made certain compromises and negotiations. But currently, they might not appear as threatening, but as time rolls on, as the international community weighs in on the way Taliban govern Afghanistan, and if they see reasons not to back Taliban, they will have an option already in place in the form of this parallel government, which is why the appointment of Sirajuddin Haqqani, that makes a lot of sense as far as the Taliban can go, because apparently we are at the end of this long decades-long war in Afghanistan. But with this Panjshir resistance in place, the Taliban will need to be on their toes to counter and to make sure that there are no resistance forces and you could say conflicts and clashes that might give an outlook or give an impression that the Taliban are not in control of Afghanistan at any point in any area. So they'll need to come across as a government that is in complete control, both militarily and administratively in Afghanistan, for which they will need to do a lot, I believe so. We'll come to the second part later in the program. But for that, currently, this declaration of a parallel government might not appear very troublesome for now, but it is something really significant going down further into the future once the world starts, evaluating how good the Taliban are coming to their word, or according to their standards that the West is basically setting for Taliban to follow. So we will have to wait and see, but the Taliban will need to be very careful as to how much room would they give.
Just want to come over to General Lodhi very quickly. General Lodhi, you're a military man. We've heard so much about the Panjshir Valley, perhaps not the international community. I mean, it's been a bastion of resistance, not only Russian forces, but the Afghan Taliban themselves. And up until recently, there were strong reports that Ahmed Massoud was not in a mood to compromise. He said, the word surrender doesn't exist in his vocabulary. Then we see a ceasefire of sorts. Then we see some sort of a passing over of enmities between these two groups. And would it have been more perhaps pragmatic for them to have made a move? I'm talking about the Afghan Taliban now, to maybe included somebody from that particular resistance movement, or do you think that would have sent the wrong message to these other minority groups who are vying for position within the Afghan government, interim government for that matter?
First of all, the formidability of this valley, it is formidable, but it remains formidable only as long as the opposing forces do not enter this valley. But what has actually happened is that Afghan Taliban have entered this valley, and they have been fighting also. They have been trying to avoid the civilian casualties. That's the reason they took some time. Otherwise, it has been surrounded from all sides. And now that the Taliban are inside also. So if I'm allowed to say contrary to what Jafri Saab was saying, this announcement from their side is not significant at all, because they have no say on ground. Yes, the only significant that Jafri Saab was saying, and I agree with him, that later on those Western countries, those who don't want to recognize the Taliban regime for whatever reason, then this could become something important. Otherwise, as far as their strength is concerned, as far as their leadership is concerned, because many Panjshiris, they have already joined Taliban, and within Panjshir, once the governor will be appointed, the thing will become very clear. Because if the governor is from the Panjshiris and he is a person who has some say and some falling in Panjshir Valley, everything will fizzle out. So with the entire country in the control of Taliban, this small valley which was formidable only as long as it was not penetrated. Now that it has been penetrated, I don't think it has got any significance. As far as this thing is coming up that Haqqani, because he's on the proscribed list and all that. If you remember that Modi was not allowed to enter USA before he got elected as Prime Minister, so things could change. Dr. Malik was also saying one thing which was important, that with the passage of time, the perception of Taliban will change, likely to change, which is true. But may I add that also with the passage of time, the perception of those detractors, those who don't want a Taliban government, their perceptions will also change. So there will be a middle ground where I think both sides will meet, and we should hope that peace continues. And if my only apprehension is that if Afghan Taliban start doing something contrary to what they are saying, then there could be problems. But as long as they keep doing, or as they say, walking the talk, keep doing whatever they are saying, I don't think there could be any problem. Yes, there would be countries those who would not like to recognize them straight away, and we know which are those countries. But now, there's not only one pole of power in the world, there are other poles also. So I think, in spite of all the powers that that pole has, with the help of China, Russia, probably Turkey, Pakistan, Central Asian countries, Iran, Taliban will be able to survive for quite some time, and then other countries will also join in. And I don't think a very big problem for them. And their legitimate, money which is lying in America or elsewhere, that will come. It can come a bit later. But it is not that they will not be able to run their government without those $9 billion, and the people will die hungry if those $9 billion do not. In fact, this exposes the double standards of the West. On one side, everybody is saying that they can die of hunger. On the other side, their own money is being withheld. So I think with the passage of time, the West will get more exposed as compared to Taliban.
I mean, I want to just pick up on what General Lodi said and give it to you, Dr. Akab. Today we've seen a lot of, well, not just today for that matter, for the last few days, we've seen a lot of shuttle diplomacy. We've seen the Afghan charm offensive. Just want to quickly bring you over to today's development. There was a virtual ministerial level, foreign minister level meeting which took place between Pakistan, which was hosting it. In fact, Shahram Qureshi, Pakistan's foreign minister, and the foreign ministers of Iran, China, the neighbouring countries, incidentally, of Afghanistan, Iran, China, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Now, what was being weighed up here, of course, is the opportunities on one side versus the challenges. And as General Lodi was pointing out, that on the one hand, we're talking about a huge humanitarian crisis which possibly could be looming, and at the same time, how to find ways and means of the Afghan Taliban having money to operate a government. So one of the two biggest challenges, I think, facing the Afghan Taliban probably right now is how to secure access to financial resources. I mean, how does a fighting force which has battled for 20 years on the battleground then make a transition and become an effective government and then learn how to use all of those tools of the government to run a country? I mean, how difficult tasks do you see ahead for the Afghan Taliban?
Well, as I mentioned just in the previous section, the reason they chose particular leaders to be in charge at this point in time was because they had prior experience in dealing with these issues. If they brought entirely new people who would not have governance experience, of not known how to deal with problems that a country would face, then I think they would be in a bigger mess. But I think because they've chosen an interim prime minister who's had experience, and the other people who surround him who have fundamentally been around for a long time, that they may be able to leverage certain options. You're right. International community, just put that aside for the time being. I think they're going to have to negotiate with certain parties from within the country. The country is not the richest country in the world. It's one of the poorest. Its infrastructure that's been built up recently over the last couple of decades is something that's very different from what happened previously. New aspirations, new needs, new wants by the population. They have to fulfill those. I think the Taliban need to recognize that the country needs to get back on its feet again. Irrespective of funding from the outside, they will make deals. I think the issue that will arise is that they'll make hasty deals with other countries, which they will regret later on. And there may be repercussions in this, especially when it comes to, for example, China and Russia, who want to go in there and exploit certain resources. There's no doubt about that, and have access to facilities there. So they'll be happy. They're businessmen and business people. And a business country-oriented country, they know exactly how to deal with a business environment and how to leverage countries around the world to get the best out of them. Taliban has not had that experience yet in real terms. So it's going to be a very testing time for them. They may just fall because of that, not being able to govern properly. I remember in the late 1990s, and I was researching for my PhD, and I went to Afghanistan a number of times because of the research that was necessary on Afghanistan. My PhD was about that, the conflict in Afghanistan. And I met with a number of the cabinet-level ministers. Funnily enough, one of the ministers gave me a chit, a written passage so I can travel around the country. He is now Amir al-Mu'mineen. So I was able to look around and see what was happening, but I was very critical as well to him and others as to how they could understand. Now they're politicians, remember now. They're not fighters anymore now. The people in government and power are all politicians. They have to think like politicians and how to navigate people and compromise and work with each other. So they're going to have to learn how to do that, not just kill everybody off. They can't do that anymore. They're going to have to learn to negotiate with other parties and compromise to an extent. There's no choice in this. So I think there's going to be a hard learning curve for them, and it's going to have to be very rapid if they don't want themselves to be pushed aside. There'll be resistance within the country, and they may grow as a result of the fact that Taliban is seen as failing. Now, they've done it before, so there's no thought that they may not do it again. But they have to learn that the world has changed a lot as well. They're no longer seen as a bunch of ragtag people who've never been in power, who wanted to bring a unified country. Now they're seen as a resistance force. They're seen as people who in the government who are on the terrorist list, and they've not got the same credibility as before, especially in the West. But the West has also got to deal with them. The West has certain needs as well. Like you mentioned earlier, they do not want parts of Afghanistan to fall into the hands of people like the Islamic State Khorasan, who are very virulent now, who did the bombing at the airport to show the world that it's on the horizon and it's there to stay. So this was a public announcement to the world that they're willing to do anything necessary to get what they want as well. And this is another front. In fact, if you check the websites, if you look at the chatter on the social media by Al-Qaeda, as well as Islamic State, in the general affiliates around the world that the Islamic State has, that they're calling for their fighters to come to Afghanistan now. That is a big issue. And this is one of the things that the West fears. I think that needs to be taken into account. The Taliban have to be very strict on this and savvy. If they fulfill that part and show that they're working hard to not allow other non-state actors to interfere in Afghan affairs, and that includes internal fighting, because the others could be seen as that, as if external countries are interfering. If there could be a compromise on that level with external countries and the Taliban, and to stop any non-state actors in whichever way they can, and to help the international community to do that and allow access to an extent, I think that's where the compromise lies. And Pakistan is one of those countries that will suffer the most if they allow access to non-state actors like Islamic State Khorasan. Even if they don't allow it and they don't keep an eye on them as much as they should. And Taliban have a sworn allegiance to Islamic State Khorasan, and that's a big issue that we face in Pakistan, primarily because there are arch enemies of Pakistan, the Taliban. If they work together, we're going to have a rise in attacks in Pakistan, most likely. I predict that that probably will happen. And they'll probably find that Taliban is not able to secure completely Afghanistan. It will have vacuums of power that the Islamic State and other parties may fill in localities, build their infrastructure, and start rising up again, and find that the country is going to have a hard time. And that neighboring countries, this is one of the meetings, one of the main points of the meeting, the ministerial meeting of neighboring countries, was not to allow Afghanistan to be a base again. And I think the rest of the world agrees with this. I think this is the fundamental point that needs to be to the Taliban, and Taliban needs to take account of this. And maybe because it does and it's willing to work with the rest of the international community to do this, they may be compromising the international community, which will help aid the real fact that Taliban does have control of the country. There's no doubt about that. But it will have to work with each other. They have to work with each other.
And on that note, that is a very important point to highlight once again, that, of course, after 20 years of fighting and defeating, the most powerful military machine on the planet, the Afghan Taliban are actually saying to the world that, we want now to integrate, we want now to work with the world, we now need the world to support us. Of course, what will be very interesting over the coming days would be the swearing-in ceremony. I think that will probably be the sort of like, the marker, the sort of like gauge as to which way the Afghan Taliban are being perceived. Of course, the invitation have gone out to their closest allies, one would say, the Chinese, the Russians, of course, Pakistan, Iran, and interestingly, there will be two countries who won't be getting an invitation. That would be the United States and the Indians. So, as Dr. Malik has said, that it's time now for the world to recognise that Afghanistan is no more a base for proxies, and that Afghanistan needs to exist and stand on its own 2 feet. On that note, I'd like to thank my guests for today's participation, Dr. Addiel Sabir joining us, Lieutenant General retired Naim Khalid Lodhi, and Moyed Jafri joining us from Law. Thank you, gentlemen, for your participation. That for today's programme. Same time, same place tomorrow. See you there.